Superheroes are everywhere these days. What with your Marvel Cinematic Universes and your Justice League movies and your Stranger Things, Goonies, or whatever. So it's no surprise that in recent years, Japan has been throwing fuel onto the superhero fire with their own unique takes on the genre, like an anime like One Punch Man and the more recent My Hero Academia. And if you feel so inclined, you should check out our recent 107 Facts video about My Hero Academia over on Cartoon Hangover, cause it's pretty rad. Anyway, today we're going to be taking a look at this high-octane, plus-ultra, most cryingest show ever produced. But really, we're not specifically going to be talking about everybody's favorite half-might hero, Izuku Midoriya. I just wanted to use the word cryingest in this intro. No, instead we're going to be looking at pretty much everybody else in the world of My Hero Academia. And more specifically, the one thing they all have in common. It's true that this show lets us know some really important information about how this universe works and how quirks develop, but some parts of this universe might be worth looking into a bit more. So the question that we're going to be taking a look at today is, does My Hero Academia get human evolution right? Now let's be super clear, I'm not really talking about superpowers, or as they're known in the show, quirks. That's a whole other video. And besides, before we can even talk about the possibility of quirks like being able to create matter, or having earphone jacks, or being a frog, we should first take a look at the base that all of these quirks are built off of. And that base is something that we're told in the very first episode of My Hero Academia. Or Boku no Hero Academia if you're like me and you can't be bothered to wait for dubbed episodes. But for today, we're going to be sticking with the English terminology of the show's dub. And for those of you who haven't seen it, we're not going to be venturing very far into the story, and we're not really going to be venturing past episode 1, so we're going to keep this video pretty spoiler-free. So definitely go check it out once you're done here, because it's actually a really great show. So in the very first episode, we meet everyone's favorite awkward, clumsy, perpetually teary-eyed hero, Izuku Midoriya, also called Deku by his childhood frenemy, Bakugo. Never let me say frenemy ever, unironically again. Very quickly, we learn that Izuku wants nothing more than to be just like his idol, the famous hero and symbol of justice, All Might. Oh, by the way, in this world, most people develop superpowers very early in life, which are known as quirks. That's a pretty important part. Not all of them are created equally, however, and some people just don't develop quirks at all. People like none other than Deku. And the reasoning we're given during his diagnosis as to why he hasn't developed a quirk is both thought-provoking and oddly specific.
People with powers have only one joint in their pinky toes. Their bodies have evolved into a more streamlined version of the human form. You can see here that Izuku has 2 joints in his pinky.
And you know what? That's all well and good. It makes sense to justify why there would be this divide between people who do and people who don't develop quirks within this show's universe. Humanity at that point is just going through a very clear weeding out process, slowly evolving and mutating until those who develop quirks are the only ones to remain. Izuku is probably just a rare case of 2 quirk users giving birth to someone who hasn't developed that mutation. Kind of like if you have brown eyes even though both of your parents have blue eyes. But the entire concept of this divide makes a huge assumption about human evolution as a whole. Along with being the catalyst that eventually led to quirks, this pinky toe mutation seems to be the only thing that separates the characters of My Hero Academia from normal, boring, regular humans like you and me. And Deku. But is this really the case? What is the next step in human evolution? And actually, we're gonna have to stop right here for now because even the word evolution itself has a few different meanings that we should explore. Because evolution today is more than just a scientific discussion. There's also an ongoing philosophical debate about how our own technological advances might fit into our evolutionary timeline. Because while the natural quirks that we see in the show may be nothing but a fantasy, and despite the fact that human evolution so far has taken millions of years, a lot of experts are, in a sense, doing their best to make it happen as soon as possible. We have the technology. This general ideological theme that we're talking about is probably best referred to as transhumanism. The idea that we, as humans, are capable of surpassing just being the meatbags that nature has dictated us to be so far. And this is generally in reference to technological advancements being made in a bunch of different scientific fields. And there is absolutely no end to the amount of cool stuff we could talk about in this episode. But just for the sake of time, let's zero in on one aspect of these advancements, how it can be related to evolution, and how it could serve as a parallel to one of the quirks we've already seen in the show. Consider something as utilitarian as prosthetic limbs. The advancements made in this field are absolutely mind-blowing. About 35 years ago in the early 80s, Canadian hero Terry Fox ran halfway across Canada as part of his Marathon of Hope to raise awareness for cancer research. And he did it all with a prosthetic leg, having lost his original leg to the illness. And looking back, his achievements are only made more amazing when you look at his prosthetic and realize it's not much more than a stick with a shoe at the bottom. Compare this to the tech that we have at our disposal now. And even though those of us who are pushing 30 might feel super old when we realize that we were born closer to the moon landing than today, in the grand scheme of things, 35 years isn't a very long time. Robotics have become much more common moving forward with the technology, especially when it comes to making them more kinetic, adding more moving parts, unlike the mostly passive and rigid prosthetics of old. And some researchers, like MIT's Hugh Herr, are working to make artificial limbs that are functionally indistinguishable from natural ones, even going so far as to create artificial legs that are able to interpret electrical impulses from the muscles of the residual limb and convert these into energy toward limb manipulation. Not to mention, the advent of 3D printing has also made making sockets to fit these prosthetics much more manageable and accessible. And these advancements have also presented problems within athletic competition. Since the introduction of blade prosthetics and legs, certain amputee runners have been denied access to competitions because of the way their prosthetic functions. The curved design of the blades, matched with how they absorb shock, means that they actually take less energy to operate than normal human legs. So while we might still be a little bit away from having just straight up engines in our legs like Tenya Ida, we might actually be a little bit closer to all of those near future think pieces than we thought. So does this mean that we should just chop off all of our legs and become superheroes? Well, no. This kind of technology still isn't exactly cheap enough for everyone to utilize. And questions exactly like that one are why there are a lot of people who take ethical umbrage with technological advancements that surpass our own abilities. Also, please don't cut your legs off. ChannelFrederator does not endorse you chopping off any of your limbs unless you're a necromorph. But you're probably not one. So we've gotten a little carried away, haven't we? While the advancements in prosthetics are amazing, there are so many more enhancements that fit under the transhumanist umbrella that we could mention. All that stuff we just talked about is just the beginning of the tip of the iceberg. But even so, this isn't exactly the same as the natural pinky toe evolution presented in My Hero Academia, which is apparently helpful in determining if you'll develop a quirk. So let's shift gears here and see what the word is on the next natural unassisted evolution in humans and what that could entail. One of the pitfalls in how we think is that we often think that we've reached our final form. This is it. This is the final stop. This is where the bus gets off the train. No, I don't want to do a second take. But practically speaking, we probably never will. Just as the cells that constitute you are constantly being replaced, humanity is in a constant state of flux, always changing and developing. Heck, if you want proof of this, look no further than your wisdom teeth. A prevailing theory is that they were useful once upon a time, but as our jawline changed, they just became these things that made everybody uncomfortable and were best left to just be yanked out of your head. But what does this have to do with Midoriya's pinky toe? Well, it means that there's a bunch of different guesses as to what's next for human evolution. Ever since this guy, Charles Darwin, sauntered onto the scientific scene in the 19th century, the process of evolution has been viewed through the lens of natural selection. The idea that certain beneficial traits in species are more likely to survive because of their usefulness. And a common illustration of this thinking involves giraffes of all things. Say there's an area that's plagued with a food shortage for insert a ridiculously long amount of time here. And the only way for herbivores to get food is by grazing the tall trees of the land. The quadrupeds with the longer necks and longer reach would be more likely to get food than their short-necked brethren. On top of the long neck having an increased chance of survival, since the short necks are likely to die sooner, the long necks will also have a better chance of reproducing sexually, creating more long necks in the process. Eventually, the short necks will have been naturally cut out of the gene pool and the long-necked trait will become the standard. Of course, this is oversimplified, but this is the basic idea. So what traits could we humans be unknowingly selecting? Actually, better idea, let's start with the validity of our main focus: Izuku's problem of missing one of 3 joints in his toe. Yes, you heard right, he's actually missing one. This is because the good doctor's explanation in the show is a little different than what we're familiar with. See, the bones that make up our toes are called phalangeal bones, and most toes have 3 of them, called the proximal, the medial, and the distal phalanges. But this joint at the bottom of the proximal phalange that connects to this bone, the metatarsal bone, also counts as a joint for your toe. And I assume that this is because without it, your toe wouldn't be connected to your foot. With this in mind, you can see that most toes have 3 phalangeal joints. They're triphalangeal, not biphalangeal as our doctor suggests. The only toe without this quality would be your big toe, which, much like your thumb, is probably biphalangeal. And this actually raises an interesting point. Here's a normal X-ray of a human's big toe. Now, here's Izuku's.
Something's wrong with the left phalange.
Not only is he missing one of the phalanges in his pinky toe, but he's also got 3 phalangeal joints in his big toe. What could this mean? Is it a rare deformity? Is he a mutant? Is he even human? Any and all of these guesses could be correct. But since the doctor doesn't make a big deal out of this, it would seem that the humans in My Hero Academia are a little different than the humans that we know ourselves to be. But I don't mean different as in having 2 joints in your pinky toe. In fact, some people are already known to have a biphalangeal 5th toe, as opposed to triphalangeal. According to a 2014 study published by UK-based scientific journal Biomed Central Musculoskeletal Disorders, having only 2 joints in your 5th toe is way more common than you think. Of the roughly 2,500 feet they examined, it was almost a 50-50 split, with 46.3% of toes having only 2 joints. Having only 1 joint on your 5th toe, on the other hand, on the other foot. Idioms are hard when I'm talking about body parts. Let's just do it again. The pinky toe only possessing 1 joint, like most of the heroes in My Hero Academia apparently have, is way less common. But many people claim that the pinky toe is pretty much useless to humans, so could a more streamlined foot be the next step in human evolution? Well, keep in mind that natural selection doesn't really actively wipe out useless traits. It only favors beneficial traits and then settles for whatever's good enough to survive. So it looks like our pinky toes, in both bi- and triphalangeal forms, could be here to stay. Unless these joints started to just actively become detrimental to our survival, like if you stubbed your pinky toe, you just died. Although to be fair, it does pretty much just feel like that anyway. Now then, this does raise the question of what caused the characters of this show to have to evolve to having this more streamlined, one-jointed, pinky-toed foot, but that might be a topic for another time. But to wrap up, let's take a look at some of the other guesses as to where human evolution could possibly be headed. As it turns out, there's actually very little consensus on what the next step could be, or if there even is a next step. Some experts believe that the only way that humans will continue to evolve is through transhumanist means, like by way of increased prosthetic functionality, or gene manipulation, or computerized implants to combat things like hearing loss or Parkinson's. Basically, the hypothesis here is that we're all going to become cyborgs. And because of humanity's vast cultural differences and just how far across the world we've all spread out, barring some sort of unforeseen event that somehow wouldn't cause all of us to go extinct, there probably won't be any more drastic natural changes to our evolution. Meanwhile, others have proposed that while it seems like human evolution may have started to slow down, it's still definitely working. Though it's pretty much impossible to predict, as natural selection has a tendency to be a wee bit unexpected. This whole topic is way more open-ended than one might think. And if you think that the idea that we might be just done is short-sighted, well, you might be right. And there have been some actual guesses as to what could happen, like women evolving to experiencing menopause later in life to everyone evolving to be taller. But conclusions like this one, of course, are problematic, as a lot of them infer things based on other studies that were only focused on a very small group of people that also make the assumption that nothing about these people or these areas are going to change across generations, even though there's a whole host of variables that could change. So there isn't really anything conclusive to draw from these guesses as it applies to large, sweeping evolutionary changes around the world. To have any firm hypothesis about the future of human evolution would be to predict the future with very little knowledge. Basically, you're trying to guess the winning lottery numbers, but you know for sure that there probably won't be any letters in the combination. And this is pretty much what My Hero Academia's take on evolution is. It's not really a prophetic look into what could be next, it's just a guess. And I'm not faulting the manga or the show for this. Even if we think that natural selection will leave the pinky toe just as it is, we can't be 100% sure that we're correct. So with all of this discussion on prosthetics, transhumanism, and the kinda sorta hypotheses on the road that human evolution could be going down on the plausibility meter, I'm going to have to rate My Hero Academia's assumptions on human evolution 2 UA staff members out of 5. But what do you think? What do you think the next steps in human evolution could be? Why do you think Suyu Asui is the best character in My Hero Academia? And finally, the million-dollar question. Keeping in mind that this show seems to have a negative for every positive in their quirks, what do you think your quirk would be? Be sure to leave us your thoughts in the comments below, and also be sure to send us any ideas for conspiracies you'd like us to take a look at in a later episode. And if you'd like to see more content focused around anime, you should check out our sister channel, Cartoon Hangover, where we post 107 facts videos about anime every month. Until then, be sure to like this video, subscribe to ChannelFrederator, and click the little bell icon next to the subscribe button to become part of our notification squad. And remember, Frederator loves you.